The core of capitalist realism. Is there no alternative? At its simplest, Mark Fisher's central thesis is this: capitalism is no longer just an economic system. It is a totalizing worldview that structures what we believe is possible. He defines capitalist realism as the widespread sense that capitalism is the only viable system, and that even imagining an alternative has become psychologically and culturally impossible. This is not presented as propaganda in the crude sense. Fisher's key move is subtler. Capitalism functions as an invisible atmosphere that shapes thought before ideology is even consciously considered. The structure of the book, a diagnostic text. The book is short, 80 pages, but dense. It operates less like a traditional argument and more like a cultural diagnosis, moving across film, education, work, and mental health. It's easier to imagine the end of the world. Fisher borrows, via Frederick Jameson and Slavoj Žižek, the idea that apocalyptic films are everywhere, but systemic alternatives to capitalism are absent. This asymmetry reveals a collapse of political imagination. Reflexive impotence. One of Fisher's sharpest concepts: people know the system is flawed, but feel unable to change it. This produces what he calls a kind of learned helplessness at a societal scale, a condition reinforced by bureaucracy, debt, and precarious work. C. Business ontology. Fisher argues that capitalism has expanded beyond markets into ontology itself, how reality is organized. Schools operate like corporations. Healthcare becomes metrics-driven. Individuals become self-managing enterprises. Everything is evaluated through efficiency, productivity, and profitability. D. Mental health as political, not personal. This is one of the most important and prescient sections. Fisher argues rising depression and anxiety are not just individual pathologies. They are systemic symptoms of neoliberal capitalism. Instead of addressing structural causes, society medicalizes distress and privatizes responsibility. This reframing is central to his political project. E. Culture as containment. Fisher draws heavily from music, film, and pop culture. Culture no longer produces the new. It recycles the past, what he later calls hauntology. Innovation is replaced by nostalgic recombination, reinforcing the sense that the future is closed. 3. Philosophical lineage. Why the book feels so dense. Fisher synthesizes several traditions. Karl Marx, capitalism as a total system. Antonio Gramsci, cultural hegemony. Jacques Lacan, the real versus perceived reality. Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, desires and systems. What Fisher adds is a 21st century update. Neoliberalism, post-Soviet ideological vacuum, late-stage media saturation. 4. Strengths of the book. Precision of diagnosis. Fisher captures a feeling many people recognize but struggle to articulate. Interdisciplinary synthesis. He moves fluidly between economics, pop culture, and psychology. 3. Psychological realism. Unlike traditional Marxism, he explains why people comply with systems they dislike. 5. Criticisms and limitation. Lack of concrete solutions. Fisher hints at resistance, but doesn't provide a detailed roadmap. 2. Tendency toward pessimism. Some critics describe the work as bordering on left melancholia, diagnosis without actionable strategy. Over-totalization. The concept can feel so pervasive that it risks becoming unfalsifiable. If everything is capitalist realism, what isn't? Fisher's life and career. Early life and education. Born in 1968 in Leicester, England. Studied philosophy and critical theory, influenced by the experimental intellectual environment of Warwick University. CCRU and intellectual formation. Fisher was associated with the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, a radical avant-garde theory group blending cybernetics, philosophy, and rave culture. This shaped his later writing style, hybrid, nonlinear, and culturally embedded. K-punk and internet influence. Before mainstream recognition, Fisher ran the K-punk blog from 2003 to 2015, one of the most influential early theory blogs, mixed music criticism, politics, and philosophy. Helped to define online intellectual culture in the 2000s. Fisher struggled with depression for many years. Key context. He explicitly linked mental illness to structural conditions. He viewed depression as partially politically produced, not just biochemical. Notably, he had sought psychiatric help shortly before his death. His passing occurred just before the publication of The Weird and the Eerie. The tragic irony. There's a stark and often discussed tension. Fisher argued mental illness is structurally produced by capitalism, yet he ultimately succumbed to the very conditions he analyzed. This has led many readers to interpret his work as not abstract theory, but deeply autobiographical in its diagnosis of despair. Why the book still matters. Capitalist realism became a cult classic because it names a pervasive modern condition: political stagnation, cultural repetition, psychological exhaustion. Its core insight still resonates. Systems don't just control behavior, they shape imagination itself. Bottom line, Fisher's work is best understood as a phenomenology of late capitalism, a theory of ideological closure, and a psychological map of why change feels impossible. It's not a blueprint for revolution, it's a diagnosis of paralysis.